Hulu has been offering up attempts at horror to varying degrees through their Blumhouse-sponsored Into the Dark series for a while now. It seems they've dropped their holiday theme and just started putting out horror of any old theme for 2021. I guess you could call Tentacles a dark romance just in time for Valentine's Day, and maybe you might be able to get away with relating Blood Moon to International Working Women's Day, or maybe even National Puppy Day kind of fits. Either way, I think it's best they just drop the holiday motif and just focus on putting out good horror. Unfortunately, seeing two of these films in one sitting only highlighted the flaws of these Blumhouse offerings, so let's do a double deep dive into these two Into the Dark features, Tentacles and Blood Moon. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights, a part of the Kings of Horror Network. I'm ML Miller. While you might be watching this video on the Kings of Horror Network, I urge you to click over to my ML Miller Frights YouTube page and give it a like. Please share with all of your buddies. Click subscribe to this channel, and don't forget to ring that bell for notifications. Into the Dark Blood Moon is directed by Tammi and written by Adam Mason and Simon Boyes. Into the Dark Tentacles is directed by Clara Aranovich and written by Alexandra Pechman and Nick Antosca. Both of these films are streaming now on Hulu. First up is Tentacles, a story about a pair of young lovers who meet by happenstance when a drifter named Tara, played by Dana Dwory, crosses paths with a photographer named Sam, played by Casey Dietrich. With nowhere to live, Tara is sneaking into open houses and sleeping there to stay out of the cold. When she meets Sam, they immediately hit it off and the two decide to throw caution to the wind, begin a relationship, and move in together in his recently deceased parents' home. While the two enjoy the initial inferno of a new passionate relationship, the longer they stay together, the more they realize both have secrets that threaten to endanger their bliss. Sam has major issues with the death of his parents, and longs to be more than just a wedding photographer. Tara, on the other hand, has a stalker ex-boyfriend. When Sam begins to have health issues, such as a bleeding ear, nightmares, hallucinations, and blackouts, he begins to wonder if something much darker is going on, and starts digging into Tara's past, which point to all sorts of unnatural horrors Sam could never imagine. The second feature is Blood Moon, a story about a single mom with a secret named Esme, played by Megalyn Ichikanwoke, who rolls into a quiet desert town with her son Luna, played by Jonas Kibriab. Immediately, she finds a secluded home on the edge of town and buys a bunch of hardware equipment to build a cage in the basement. Turns out Luna is some kind of werewolf who turns into a small but vicious little monster when the moon is full every month. While Esme attempts to chart out the most dangerous days of the month, for which Luna must stay caged up during, she faces the challenges of working as a single mom and Luna's growing need to have a life and freedom of his own. Meanwhile, the local sheriff is very suspicious of Esme and Luna's mysterious moves after dark, which include murdering and stealing cattle from the local farms to feed Luna's lycanthropic hunger. Now, through these descriptions, these films seem as different as can be, but when you watch them in succession, some very big flaws become apparent. I want to start out positively, though, and I will say that all of the actors in both films do a decent job, both conveying somewhat complex characters facing dark hurdles and twisted challenges. I think I like Ichinowoke's and Kandrieb's more naturalistic performances in Blood Moon over the leads in Tentacles, but both films are capably acted. The first problem lies in the intent of these stories. While no horror is terror from the beginning to end, both Blood Moon and Tentacles really wait until the last minute to show their horror card. For the most part, Blood Moon is a struggle of a single mother, and Tentacles is about a couple diving into an intimate relationship before they really know one another. The drama is extended to painful lengths before even the hint of horror comes along, and once it does, the horror is tame at best. In both cases, these are stories we've seen before. The werewolf dealing with his curse every month and facing challenges along the way to cover it up is a theme present in almost every werewolf film out there, from Wolf to the original Universal Wolfman. The guy who gets into a relationship with a woman and finds himself shocked that she isn't what he expected is almost a beat-for-beat story of the Moorhead Benson film Spring, and you can tie that all the way back to Splash if you really want to look at the story in that way. These stories aren't original, yet the filmmakers behind them are treating them like these well-worn paths are something sparkly and new. This is mainly because it's quite evident in both films that the filmmakers really haven't seen too many horror films. They aren't fans. It shows from the way the horror is shuffled to the back end of the film or off screen. It shows in the way cliches are highlighted as something we haven't seen a million times. This tourist filmmaking from directors and writers who not only have little on their resume, but also seem to have avoided watching horror and truly understanding what makes horror work in the first place. It's also very interesting that the structure of both Blood Moon and Tentacles are extremely similar if you step back a few paces. I was told early on in my writing career that the story begins on the day something different happens. You don't tell a story about what happens on the 1800th if uneventful day at work unless on that 1800th day something spectacular happens that is different from all those days before it. You begin with a brief intro with what is the norm, and then you immediately throw that norm on its ass, making the beginning of the story when something actually happens to incite the change in a character's life. That's what a story is. In both cases, with Blood Moon and Tentacles, the story focuses on a female character with some kind of predicament, but basically surviving one situation to the next until the end comes. And in both instances, the film ends with the protagonist walking away, heading out with that same bundle of problems and issues, and simply moving on down the road with very little changes to the character. If your character is the same at the beginning as it is in the end, you haven't told a story, and both Blood Moon and Tentacles are guilty of this. Sure, there was some kind of challenge both faced, but honestly, the protagonists we meet in the opening moments are relatively the same right before the credits roll. I don't want to rip into the Dark too much. It is giving young filmmakers a chance to shine, but one would think that a studio like Blumhouse would be able to provide some kind of guidance towards these filmmakers to make a product that is A, scary, and B, interesting enough to sustain attention for a full-length feature. I think the feature-length format is way too long for the amount of story we get, and that's evident by the drag I felt during Tentacles in the middle and the repetition Blood Moon suffers from the numerous full moon tensions that are built up to. These Into the Darks should be hour-longs. They'd play much better, and while we get some interesting body horror in Tentacles, both films suffer in the effects department and use only bare-bones CG towards the very end of the whole thing, again feeling more like an afterthought than a true appreciation to horror effects. I wouldn't recommend either Tentacles or Blood Moon, as both are extremely tepid, scareless, and poorly paced attempts at horror. While some of these Into the Darks have proven to be interesting, Good Boy, Culture Shock, and Puka come to mind, most feel like stepping stone fodder for fledgling filmmakers geared towards tweens as a gateway horror, but the pacing is so off and the teeth have been filed down so far that it's not going to impress fans to seek out more horror and surely leave hardcore horror-philes sorely disappointed. That'll be it for today. Please chime in down below in the comments and let me know how on the nose or mind-numbingly wrong I am, or you can counter with your own review. So guys, you know how YouTube works. I'd love to be able to dedicate more time to this channel. I'm not monetized yet, so if you want to help me out, remember to hit all the pertinent bells and whistles down below. Want some spooky comics to read? I have 2 new horror comic book trade paperbacks you should look out for. Both Gravetrancers and Pirouette, collecting never-before-published issues, can be found in only the finest of comic book shops. If you're looking for written reviews, you can find them on my website, mlmillerwrites.com. If you really want to show your support, I also have a Patreon page at mlmiller. Look for the link to my Patreon page down below. Thank you so much for your time, and take care. You're doomed to live.
You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. God doomed. Live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside